Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. If you are just joining us, welcome to session 3 of our webinar series From Classroom to Zoom. This time we are going to talk about how to build a community in our virtual classrooms. And we all know at this point it's quite different from our in-person classes. So I just want to give you some techniques to help build that community and those relationships with your students. We are using Nearpod, so you can go to join.nearpod.com. And if you get lost during the session, the code is up here in the top left corner, FLOZE. Okay, so there are 3 main ways to build a community, and this applies in person and then also in our virtual classrooms. So way number 1, connect with students, right? You've got to get to know your students. They've got to get to know you a little bit so that you build that relationship, build that connection. Way number 2 is to connect students with each other. So we've got to get our students in our class talking to each other and getting to know one another. And that's going to help us build a community as well. And then, of course, we have to connect with home. So we need to build a relationship with the families, with parents, with guardians, so that we have that communication in place, and we have that community between the students and home and us all together. So we're going to talk about how to do that virtually. We're going to specifically look at Google Forms and Google Slides to discover ways to build a classroom community virtually. These are 2 really versatile applications. They aren't the only applications by no means, but I want to give you some ideas as far as how to use these in your classroom. Okay, so the first thing we've got to do is connect with students. We need to get to know our students, and they need to get to know us a little bit. We need to have that exchange so that we build a relationship with them. In the classroom, this is pretty easy, right? We greet them as they walk in the door. We make comments. We get to know them. Hey, how was your day? What did you have for lunch? And over the course of time, we kind of build this knowledge bank, I guess, about our students. And, if you've sat in a Zoom classroom or Google Meet classroom, you know that you don't really have those same opportunities to talk to each student individually. And so we can use technology to help us get to know our students better. So I want to look at a couple of different ways to do that. This is using forms. We can send surveys to our students. And Google Forms it really is a survey or quiz application. You can create all different types of questions, and then you can send it via a link so that students can then fill it out. And so I've got some basic examples here of the different type of surveys that I've done or I would do in my classroom. So first things first, I'm just going to look at this Gay Straight Alliance example. Okay, so this is just my basic registration form. They fill out, basic information. So their email, legal name they go by, pronouns, where they're at. But this box is one that kind of surprised me. So I felt like I needed something just so that they could let me know any issues that they might have or anything that I just need to know about them. I didn't think I'd get a whole lot of response, so I just added a box. Anything you'd like to share with me? And the responses that I got in this box were amazing. These kids opened up about maybe some mental health issues that they've been facing. They opened up about issues that they're facing at home. They told me things like, well, this is my name that I go by, but I'm not out to my parents, so please don't let them know. So just adding that little box where they can type as much as they want really helped me get to know some of my students a lot better. So I wanted to show you this because you don't have to do anything super fancy with Google Forms. It can be a really basic form with just a line that says anything you want to share with me, and that's going to help you get to know your students. Okay, jumping back to the Nearpod, there are a few other examples here. This one's really cool, the 16 personality types example. This one is not my example. but I love it and I want to use it with my students. And so they take the 16 personalities quiz and determine who they are. And this quiz, the 16personalities.com, it's really great. The graphics are really great, and the way that it's summarized is easy to read and follow along with. And so they take that quiz and then they tell you who they are. What personality type that they are. And so that alone can give you a lot of information as far as who that student is. But also, I think this quiz is a great way for students to get to know themselves. So jumping back to that Nearpod, forms can be used as a way to kind of gauge what your students feel about your class and their learning in your class. So this is one that I give to my students. It's a mid-year class survey. And in this one, I asked quite a few different questions. So let's see, I'll fill it out, or I'll start to fill it out to show you some of the types of questions. Basically, I wanted them to tell me how they were feeling in my class. So this first question, what project did you enjoy the most and why did you enjoy that the most? I have questions on here that ask them about the class environment. So, do they feel respected by their peers? Do they feel respected by me? How do they prefer to work, individually or in groups? I'm asking them about their working preferences. Do they want pen and paper, Chromebooks? So this kind of gives me, and I really want to show you, we'll look at the back end of this a little bit too. This really gives me a good idea, especially when I send it to all my students, things that I could do to make their learning experience better. So if they all told me, I prefer working with pen and paper, maybe I'll throw aside my Chromebooks once in a while and move to that pen and paper. And then there's another, jumping back to the Nearpod, there's another beginning of the year survey here. And this one's not mine, but I really love the questions that this one asks. So how do you get back and forth from school each day? Who do you live with? How does your living situation impact your schoolwork? What responsibilities do you have outside of school? And so these questions really, really are applicable to our learning environment right now, right? It can tell us a lot about our students' needs as they're at home learning. And so those are my examples with Google Forms. And these are just really, Google Forms is just a great way to easily collect that information. So let's see. Okay, so you send the form to students with a link, they fill it out. And then what I really love about Google Forms is it gives you really nice data snapshots. So you can look at each response individually and see their individual answers. And you can also put that in a sheet so that you can see it all individually as well. But Google Forms also kind of analyzes the data and it displays it in kind of helpful ways so that a quick glance, I can see here, what project did you enjoy the most? Well, 55%, the majority of my kids enjoyed that Norse mythology project. And so it just gives me a quick glance there. And so you've got pie charts for a lot of the questions. So I can see that the majority of my students feel respected, but there's still a little sliver that don't feel respected by their peers. And so that might be something I work on. I can see, I feel that I need help the most with, and that's kind of even across the board. Then, depending on the question, it'll display the data in different ways. So the text boxes, you can scroll through the responses to individual questions really easily. This chart was one where they can check multiple boxes, and so it kind of displays it in a different way. So that is a huge advantage to forms, is just being able to look at that data, especially when you're thinking you have 120, 150 students. This gives you a really easy way to kind of go through all of that. So that's Google Forms. Now let's talk about Google Slides. Google Forms, if we just kind of compare briefly, is great for surveying your students and collecting kind of mostly text data so they can fill in information to tell you, and that's great. and it gives you really great ways to store it. Google Slides, though, is more of like the activities that you're going to give students to get to know them. So I've got two activities here. The first one is design your reading room activity. And these really are the same concept activity, just two different ideas. And so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. Basically, with this activity, they're given a choice of rooms. Um, and once it loads, I'll show you those rooms. So they're given a choice of rooms, right? They can pick any of these. And then they're being asked to fill it with, in this case, it's books. So they might fill their bookshelves with their favorite books. Maybe they put some comfy furniture around, some posters on the wall. Anything that reflects who they are and what they prefer is what they're doing here. And the same concept can be applied to the fill your locker activity. So with this activity, it's built in Google Slides as well. And they are, instead of filling their bookshelves, they are filling their locker with different things that might reflect them. So in my example, I have like a coffee cup, a plant, some of the things from books and movies that I like. Um, and so students could do this too. And Forums lends itself to this type of activity really, really well because if you go to Insert Image and search the web, you will see that Google image search is built in. And so whatever they need to find, it is right here. And then they can just drag it in and add it to their locker. And so this concept can be applied to lockers, to reading rooms. I've seen a teacher do like build your perfect study spot, right? We have a lot of students who maybe don't want to let us into their homes and show us that. So maybe instead we create a slide where they build their ideal study spot, and that's a good way to get to know your students too in a couple of different ways. So what they add to their locker or to their reading room or to their study area is going to tell us a little bit about their personality. But it's also going to show us their tech skills. So can they navigate this kind of activity without any issue, without needing your help? Or do they need a little bit of support? And so that's going to give you an idea in a couple of different ways. This is another activity. This one's not mine, but I love this one. They pick a word that applies to them, and then they have to define it, give it some synonyms, find a quote, and explain why. And so, as you can see, Slides has a lot of potential here in creating interactive activities that are very visually appealing to our students. Okay, so what makes Slides a great tool for this type of interactive activity? And I briefly mentioned that Google image search. So Google image search is built in. They can add clip art that way, but they can also upload any images that they have on their computer as well. And then I love that Google Slides has a built-in, selection of all the shapes, and these are highly modifiable. So you can change the color, you can modify the shape a little bit and the ratios, and then you can add text to them as well. And then of course you've got this magic button here. I'm calling it a magic button. It's your hyperlink button. So you might say, here's an example. A student might have a record player in their reading room, and when you click on the record player, maybe they've linked to a song that they love on YouTube, and so that adds a different element to these types of interactive activities. You can also change the size of slides to meet your needs. So what we saw, the two examples, those were the basic slide size. But if you want something that's more like a piece of paper, so 8.5 by 11, you can do that. If you want a square, 10 by 10, you can do that. So you can change it to whatever size that you need. And then Google Classroom makes it really easy to make a copy for each student to edit. So if I create that build your ideal reading room slide, then I can just put it as a Google Classroom assignment, say make a copy for each student, and bam, they've all got their own copies to work on. So those are some things that make slides really, really great as far as this. And like I said, the examples I showed you are just that. They're examples. They're not the only thing that you can do with Google Slides and getting to know your students. And so the world's Google Slides gives you a lot of opportunity to create fun activities like that that'll help engage and help you get to know your students. Okay, so we also need to connect our students to one another, right? And in our last session, we talked about student communication and we looked at some Padlet boards. And so if you're interested in going in depth a bit more in student communication, definitely check out that recording from session 2. It goes into depth there. But I want to talk a little bit about how G Suite applications can really make this connecting students possible. So this is another magic button in G Suite applications. And this is in a lot of them. This is in slides, docs, sheets, sites, Jamboard. This share button allows students to share it with a peer, and then they can work on one board or slide or document, whatever it is they're working on together collaboratively. And so that's one way to get them knowing each other and get them learning about each other. There's also built-in comments. So students can type in a document and comment back and forth to one another in real time. And so I think G Suite applications are really, really built for that, connecting students aspect. All right. So these are some collaborative activities, or these are some activities that can be collaborative using those G Suite collaborative features like sharing and comments. And so these are just some examples, obviously. The world really opens up when you start using those collaborative features with your students. So this one is really cool. This is a class music playlist. And the idea behind this one is that everyone contributes a song, and you know they've got different things they have to add here. So what is the song? Who sings it? Give me the link to the lyrics and the link to the song. And then throughout the school year, you have a class playlist. So they're sitting in your class and they think, oh, that's my song. And it feels like they are connected to your classroom. They are important there, right? When you use something like this. So I really, really love this. And this isn't mine, but I can tell you that I will be using this for sure. Then we've got some other activities here, and I don't know if I'm going to show all of them. But definitely click around and these are linked to in that resource. We have that big resource page, and all of these are linked. So if I'm going really quickly or I'm not clicking on everything like you want me to in that resource, then I will definitely make sure I point out where the link is at the end. But click through that resource. It's got all of this here. And so this is a collaborative group project, and I love the kind of humor that's used here because that's great for high schoolers. I'm a high school teacher for sure, and I love doing this kind of this humor, these memes, this collective groan, because you know they hate group projects. But this has students are taking a personality test, and they're kind of collecting that data on the sheet, and they're all working on this together. That's what's really, really great. They're adding their personality type to a class slide deck. And so not only do you get to know your students, but students can go and look at that together, and then they get to know one another as well. So if I'm going back to my list, this one uses Google Sites, so this group activist blog, and I'll just click on this example to show you. Unless it doesn't like me. There it goes. So this was one of the activities that I had for my ELA students. And Google Sites is a really easy website creator, and it works in a collaborative manner just like other G Suite applications, so they can share it and then they can all work on it together. And so students were looking at stereotypes. They had to choose a stereotype. and tell us why that stereotype isn't always accurate. And it was more of an activist kind of blog as well. So that we're advocating against stereotypes. And so this group decided to look at different personas. So they look at tattoos and piercings, race, religion, and they work together to type up each page and add the images to it. And so this, and one of the things that I notice when I'm doing these collaborative activities with students is that they really have, when they're creating one product, they really do have to work together to get it looking exactly how every single person in that group wants it to look. So that is very briefly covering how G Suite applications can be collaborative, getting students to know one another. I will be looking more at G Suite and the collaborative features there in session 5 when we look at student creation. So next we need to connect with home, right? And one of the things that you can do to connect with home is to create a Google site. And this can help you organize information to get to families that Google Classroom cannot. One of the big questions I get most of the time is, okay, I have a Google Classroom. Why do I always also need a Google site? It seems like that's double the work. Families can't see what's in the Google Classroom like students can. They get those guardian summaries that just kind of tell them, hey, your student has this coming up, but they can't see everything. And so a Google site gives you the ability to share information with your parents, with your families a little bit easier. So this is was my ELA site, and I have a few different things that they could navigate. So I've got my calendar on there, which had all of the due dates. So if parents wanted to add this Google Calendar to theirs, they could. I've got my contact information here so they know how to get in contact with me. I've also got units. So if they're kids saying, hey, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing here, they can say, okay, well, let's go to that class site together and look at the unit site and get some of the information from it. And so, and I've got another example on, if we jump back to that Nearpod, it's the library website. So it kind of it acts in the same way, communicating information to parents that maybe I can't get to them with just a Google Classroom. So that's Google Sites, and they're really, really, really easy to build and maintain. But then also, we can use Google Forms in the exact same way that we used it with the students. So we can collect information from families in that way too. And one of the very first things I always send out to my parents is, just a preferred contact method. Because we have their emails, we have their phone numbers, but do they want to be emailed? Do they want text messages? Do they want phone calls? I don't know. So I send out just a form, tell me your name, your child's name, how do you prefer to be contacted, and then list that preferred email or phone number. And then of course I add that box, is there anything you want me to know about your child? And that was especially helpful this year because I got a lot of, okay, my student or my child is brand new to the high school. And that kind of, especially in a virtual environment, it's helpful to know that. This is just a student parent library survey. So they're being asked, what is something that you would like to see your library offer? And this is linked on that website, on my library website. And it's really, like I said, easy to collect that data and, get to know my parents and my community in that way. And I'm building my community. I'm getting to know everybody within that community. So this is my last question here. Now that we've started school virtually, how have you started building your classroom community? And I think this is something that's really new to all of us, right? We know how to build a community when we're in the classroom, but now how do we translate that? One thing that I've seen that's been very successful is Usually we stand at our door and we welcome each student. We just briefly say, good morning, how are you? And we have that little exchange. It's not always a big exchange. Sometimes, especially in the early morning with teenagers, it's just, they're here, right? But we can do that online as well. So as students join your as your students join your Zoom or your Google Meet, you can say, oh, hi, Christopher, it's nice to see you. How are you? And just acknowledge that they're there, just like they're walking through your door. That's one thing that I've seen that's very successful. And students, my experience is that they like that. They kind of like to be acknowledged. And when we're working on other like activities in class, one of my groups was doing that bookshelf activity, and I'm going through, we're all working on the same document, and I'm just saying, oh, Katrina, that is a really nice poster. Tell me more about it. And so they just like that kind of individual attention. It's easy to do in the classroom, and maybe sometimes we don't think about it in the virtual setting because really we feel like YouTubers, and sometimes it can feel like we're talking to nobody. But it is important, even if they aren't speaking to you, if they're only typing, that's okay. Still acknowledge them by their name. Um, so last slide here has a lot on it. I want to explain what everything is. First things first, our next session is Gamify Your Classroom. We're going to talk about some ways to add gaming elements to your activities. And that's on the August 27th at 5. This is that resource guide that I have mentioned a few times. And so I just want to show you exactly what that is. So all of our sessions are here, linked here. Everything that I use that's an external website is linked, as well as some webinars or some step-by-step guides. These 30-minute sessions go by quickly, and there's a lot left to cover. So if you walk out thinking, oh, I really like slides, but I don't know where to start, that's okay, because you can come to this resource guide and it'll give you that step-by-step information that you need. The other two things on here, this is share your best practices. So we're all in this new virtual environment together. I want to know what's working. And we're going to highlight those in our last session. And then we are going to give a certificate of completion for attending this webinar series. So please take a few minutes to complete the survey. That's how we're going to know that you were here, and how we know where to get that certificate for you. So I really, really appreciate you joining me today. I hope that you got something out of it, and I hope to see you in the next session.